Welcome to the Academic Writing Amplified podcast. On this podcast, we believe that the culture of academia needs to change radically. Women and non-binary people are revolutionizing academia within institutions that were not built for us. If you're ready to reject the culture of overwork, kick guilt and overwhelm to the curb, and amplify your voice to make a real impact on your field without breaking down or burning out, you're in the right place. With our team of experienced writing coaches as co-hosts, we'll share insights and talk to inspiring guests to bring you the practical strategies, systems, and mindset shifts you need to find time to write, publish work you love, and design your career on your terms. And it all starts with writing. Let's go. Hello, podcast listeners. It's Cathy Mazak from Scholar's Voice, your host for today's podcast. And today we are talking about experiments in self-trust. So this came to me during a coaching session with a group in one of our programs. And the title just kind of hit me, and I'm like, I got to write that down. Experiments in self-trust. Because I talk a lot in my coaching about the importance of trusting yourself and actually the importance of creating processes and systems based on you and what you like and what has worked for you in the past, and trusting that you have some very wonderful, innate, deep down, developed over the years knowledge that is really all that you need to create the career and the life that you want. But we have to filter all of that through all the messages that come to us about what it means to be a successful academic and what work looks like, and all of these kinds of social messages that we get, and all of the cultural stuff we have to wade through in academia. We have to filter through all of that to be able to really act on our self-trust. So I thought a podcast episode dedicated to how the heck to do that might be helpful. So today I have 5, I'm calling them experiments in self-trust. They're basically things to try in order to tap into your innate wisdom, your inner voice. Tara Moore calls it your inner mentor, but it's that inner knowledge that you have, to tap into that and call it trustworthy. See it as trustworthy. So I'm going to be talking about that in today's podcast. There's 5 things to try. I'm going to get into it. But first, I wanted to let you know that as you are listening to this podcast, we are actually coming to the end of our Navigate enrollment period for our summer cohort of Navigate. Now, if you want all the juicy details, we have a podcast episode that is just a few episodes back called the Navigate Info Session. And if you want to go to the YouTube channel, so if you just search for me on YouTube, Cathy Mazak, you will find our Scholar's Voice YouTube channel. And we have the video version of that if you would rather see it with the slides and everything. But if you want to consume on the go, then the podcast version is equally as great. It's just the audio from the info session. I'll give you some highlights and ask you to please consider applying for Navigate. So here's the highlights. Our summer cohort runs on Wednesdays at noon Eastern. We have a meeting for 12 Wednesdays between May 15th and July 31st. The program is a combination of recorded content and those live meetings. So every week you'll watch a video. We also give you all of those videos as audio podcast episodes so that they're really easy for you to listen to if you don't want to sit down at your computer and watch. And there's a beautiful fillable PDF workbook. And those are the 3 main components of the program: the recorded content, the workbook, and the live call. On the live calls, we start out with a welcome call where we get to know everybody. Then we have a coaching call the next week, and then we have a co-writing call. And for the rest of the program, we alternate between coaching together and writing together. And during that process of the 12 weeks, you will work on a low-hanging fruit publication. That is a publication that just needs a little bit of time and attention to get out the door. And your goal will be to submit that article or piece for publication by the 12 weeks, that would be July 31st in this case, by the end of Navigate. In the process, you will learn how to design your publication pipeline, how to manage your writing projects, how to estimate how long it takes to write something, how to break projects into tasks. You will clear out all the extraneous activities that have managed to stick themselves to you before now by auditing all of your activities based on the academic mission statement that you will write. This is going to create some space in your calendar and will create a much more aligned career. Once you've done that, you'll work on your ideal week. You'll learn our soaring system, which is our writing system that prioritizes a positive relationship with your writing. And by the end of that, you will have everything that you need to clear your backlog of papers over the next year. So yes, you will publish one thing by the end if you follow our curriculum, and you will have all the tools that you need to clear that backlog of papers. So if you are a professor, we have a good mix this time because we've already started, we've been collecting applications and we've been having our onboarding, our pre-enrollment calls. So we have a good combination of pre-tenure, post-tenure people in the program already. So wherever you are on your professorial journey, I invite you to apply. We do have an application process, which is why you need to apply now, because we are going to close applications on April 19th, and then we'll close enrollment on April 26th. So you have until April 19th to submit your application. But before you get to join the program, you also need to do a pre-enrollment call with me. So the sooner you apply, the better selection of call times you'll have. And then we're closing enrollment on April 26th, and we start our first call on May 15th. I'll be so excited to meet you and work with you in person. You might have seen that there has been a pricing change. We've actually lowered the price for the summer cohort. So you can check out all the curriculum, the pricing details, everything you need at scholarsvoice.org/navigate. At the top of that page, you'll find a pink button and it should say apply now. If you're listening to this podcast later in some other time, it might say join the waitlist. And in that case, either way, either join the waitlist if it's not during our enrollment time. But if you're going to that page now, you will find the apply now button. It's a simple application. You can do it like if you're listening to this on your phone, which you probably are, you can just pop over there right now and quickly fill out the application. That starts the process. And the application will only take you 5 minutes tops. Pretty straightforward. It just helps us to kind of make sure that we're only passing people on to the pre-enrollment call who are qualified for the program. And I would love to talk to you, right? It's really fun to meet podcast listeners. So go to scholarsvoice.org/navigate and apply for our program if you have a backlog of papers and you know that your voice needs to get out there in the world. All right. So self-trust, experiments in self-trust. Let's see. I have these in my notes, but I don't think that the order is what I want it to be. So I'm going to start with something very straightforward and that maybe is like a little easy for academics, which is the first experiment in self-trust will be to gather evidence about how you can trust yourself. Okay, so gather evidence. So here's what it looks like. You get a piece of paper, a journal maybe, and you write a big list of all the times that you trusted your gut, that you trusted your decision-making, that you trusted yourself and made a decision that was the correct decision. You could even like try to think of specific times in your life when people were telling you to do something else and you were like, no, I'm going to trust my gut. And that decision was the right one. So why do we gather evidence? So a lot of times, well, most of the time, our brain is working against us. Most of the time, our brain is remembering only the things that went wrong. So a mistake you feel like you made or something like that. And so we don't have a clear view of when were the times that all the many, many times that have just now faded into the background where you trusted yourself, made a decision, and the decision was the correct one or the decision paid off for you. So we tend to just like forget those because those were like the things that worked out. So we don't feel guilty about them. We don't feel sad about them. And our brain is just like forgets them and dwells on all the negative things, right? So the first experiment in self-trust would be to create an evidence list about why and how, some past evidence that you are trustworthy, that you can trust that inner mentor, that inner voice. You want to write that down. And maybe this is something that you want to keep as like a running log of times that you listened to your own gut, made a decision, and it paid off, or it was the correct decision for you. Of course, just having objective, quote unquote, objective evidence does not solve your emotional feelings, but especially for academics who love data, this can help you to see and to keep a record of all the times that you have come through for yourself. And that's one of the ways that you can build self-trust. Okay, so that's way number one is gather evidence. Let's go to number two is going to be read the book Playing Big by Tara Moore. So to me, this is the book that if anybody is trying to work on trusting themselves more, this is the book to read. I mean, especially women, because she's definitely writing for women. But it is a really great book. There are many exercises in this book. And the one that I like the most is a visualization exercise where she kind of walks you through this visualization where you meet yourself in 10 or 20 years. I guess you get to decide how far into the future. And the idea of this visualization exercise is that your future self has figured out whatever problem you're working on right now. So the thing that's stressing you out now, or the problem you're trying to solve now, you in 10 years has solved it, or you in 20 or 30 years has solved it. So this visualization exercise helps you consult that future version of yourself. And it is a way to develop that kind of relationship or that dialogue with your inner mentor. And that helps you build self-trust. Because remember, what we're trying to do here is not look outward for our solutions, but look inward and trust ourselves to come up with the best solutions to our own problems. So experiment in self-trust number two is reading Playing Big by Tara Moore. Her last name is spelled M-O-H-R. And do that visualization exercise or any one of the number of wonderful exercises in that book. And because really, to me, that is a book that I go back to. As you've heard me say on the podcast, I go back to that book over and over again in terms of helping to grow my own ability to trust myself. Related to that, in Tara Moore's book, she talks about fear. So number three is what to do about fear. Or number three is treat yourself with self-compassion. If you have been a person who has been hard on yourself, so you're a person who has, when you do something wrong, it's like there's a lot of self-critique, there's a lot of like your internal messages to yourself about your decisions are things you would never say to your own children or to your students or to your friends, right? So your inner voice is exceptionally harsh. So one way to help build your self-trust is to change that inner voice to be more self-compassionate. Recognize that you might feel fear that you're going to mess up, fear that you'll make a mistake and things won't work out the way you wanted them to. Combat that fear with self-compassion. So experiment number 3 in self-trust is to work on self-compassion. Self-compassion as a pathway to self-trust. All right. The 4th thing, and then I'm going to give you like an exercise for number 5. So the 4th thing is to remember that trusting yourself is a process. So there is no end point to it. There's no moment where you're like, now I trust myself, so check mark, and now I can work on some other aspect of self-development. No, you are going to have to work over and over again at trusting yourself. And as you do that, your ability to trust yourself will up level. Like you'll be able to see more clearly and more quickly situations where you're acting in a way that you're not trusting yourself. And you'll be able to correct those situations and choose a different path. You'll be able to do that more readily, more easily, because you have like almost like exercised the self-trust muscle over and over again and get better and better at it. So there's actually a beautiful podcast called The Self-Compassionate Professor. So go look that one up. I was on it quite a while ago, probably during the pandemic in 2020 sometime. And I remember on that podcast saying, like, I really trust myself. And at that moment, I really did. And I still do. But I've gone through some other kind of difficulties in my career and with my business that have caused me to self-doubt. And I've had to relearn or rework on or up-level my self-trust to get through those difficult times. So if you listen to that podcast that I was featured on, The Self-Compassionate Professor, and then you listen to like my podcast that I did earlier this year called My Mission, you'll hear a difference between the way I talked about myself in my business then and the way I talk about myself in my business now. I think it's definitely more mature. But what's happened over those years, which was like 4 years, is that I really like went through some difficult things and had to work more on trusting myself in new ways. And so this is just to say that it's a journey, and these are ways to start or ways to develop your self-trust, but know that it is never finished. You always can come back to self-trust and learning more how to trust yourself more and more. All right. The 5th thing, the 5th experiment in self-trust. I like this one. I came up with it. It's mine. It's now for you. So Alexander Frazen calls it the HUT, the heart-gut combination. And that is that place inside of you that kind of, people call it like listening to your gut, or it's like that inner place, right? It's another way to talk about the same phenomenon of the inner voice, the inner mentor, and trusting that. So I realized that a lot of the time I would want to do something, or like I would have an idea. And then not a split second would pass that I would think of all the reasons not to do that. So this happens especially when I am by myself. So for example, when we do our retreat in July, our writing retreat at the Dreamcatcher, I am very particular about having times that I'm with the group and times that I'm away from the group, because I'm running the retreat. It takes a lot of energy. So I really am trying very hard to manage my energy. I don't want to just be like available, even though my extrovert self kind of loves to be with people. But I know that if I overdo it, then I'm going to feel resentful the next time that I need to be with people. So I'm just like very measured in terms of how I spend my energy. Like here we're together, here we're having one-on-one. Now I retreat to my room. So I will have during the retreat, and this is what we did last year, and it's my same plan for this year, I will have blocks of time, usually in the afternoons, where I retreat from the retreat. And so my kids aren't there, my husband's not there. I am basically by myself on purpose. I need to be by myself in order to recharge. And I'll have an idea. It'll go like this. Okay, I have 2 hours, I have 3 hours. I think I'll take a walk on the beach. And then immediately my brain will go like, do you really want to walk on the beach? Maybe instead you should read, or maybe you should catch up on some emails, or why don't you try writing or something like that. So there would be like, I would have a feeling like an urge. Let's call it an urge. I have an urge, and immediately my brain would shut that down, would give it like lots of reasons not to do what my initial urge was. I don't think you should be going around the world always acting on your urges. Like, obviously, this is not good advice, especially depending on your age, right? But and I only say that because I am dealing with teenagers at home. And if they acted on their every urge, it would be a disaster. But I think, especially as women, that we are taught, or we learn from society, that we're not supposed to have urges. And so we can't trust that feeling or that thing. Like, I think I want to do this. And what happens is, because we're so used to like stamping down those urges or those first thoughts and self-critiquing them so that you don't ever do the thing, that you also stamp down your inner mentor when you do that. You also stamp down that inner voice, and you kind of are saying to yourself, you're always second guessing yourself. So it seems like, oh, that inner voice is untrustworthy without further scrutiny, like without second guessing and third guessing. So here's my experiment for you. Here's my experiment for you. It can just be for an afternoon. It could be for a day. It could be for a week, whatever you want. I want you to listen to that first urge, the first thing, like when you're sitting someplace and you're like, oh, I want a cup of coffee. Instead of saying, no, you drank too much coffee today, just drink the coffee. Same thing, like, oh, I really feel like I need to stretch my back. Oh, but I need to finish these few sentences. Nope, get up and stretch your back. So the idea here is actually to like do your gut feeling thing before you talk yourself out of it. And this is why I call this an experiment in self-trust, is that if you are a mature adult and not a teenager like my children, then probably that gut thing is trustworthy, and you should just play with what it feels like to trust it. So that's an experiment in self-trust that I am do your first gut feeling thing. And just notice, and all it can be too is like, it's a period of noticing that there is a gut feeling or a urge or like a first thought, and that your brain is so quick to come up with all the objections and all the second thoughts. And what I want you to do is listen to that first thought. Again, as an experiment in self-trust. Okay, so I've given you 5 experiments in self-trust, including gather evidence, read Playing Big by Tara Moore, do the visualization exercise, recognize fear and treat it with self-compassion. Another way to say that one is like exercise your self-compassion muscle as a way to get to self-trust. Remember that self-trust is a process and that you will continue to develop it throughout your lifetime. And finally, try this gut feeling exercise where you do your gut feeling thing instead of doing your second guessing, and play with that and see what that feels like. I did this like as an exercise for myself and found it to be really, really empowering. I will say that I'm very rarely, just so you know, very rarely in a situation where I am alone. I don't travel for work that much. often, like my son studies in an online school, so he's at home all day. Like this, I'm never, like very rarely completely alone, that I am not, in the world doing something like the grocery shopping or like driving the car, when really I can't work on my urges. Like I can't just listen to my urges because I'm on the way to pick up the children or something like that. So finding a moment to try that last experiment has been hard for me, which is why I give you the example of the writing retreat, because that's when I really could do it. And I will do it again this summer at our writing retreat. But see what you can do, like try it, like just play around with these ideas and make it a goal for yourself to develop your self-trust, because it will serve you better than any other development work that you could do. All right, have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you so much for spending your valuable time supporting yourself and your writing by listening to this episode. If you like what you heard today, the best way to say thank you is to hop on over to Apple iTunes and write an honest review. The more reviews, the more amazing academic women and non-binary people will find this podcast. So go write one now.